Hello, welcome to the first video with light in the background. Today I will be talking about The Bride. It finally came out, my most anticipated movie of 2026. I got to see it with a friend. I'm super excited. Huge spoiler warning, obviously. I just can't talk about a movie without spoiling it, so if you want to watch this movie, don't watch this video first. Before I get into what happened in the movie, I want to give you my thoughts leading into this movie. As you would know if you saw my most anticipated movies of 2026 video, I definitely wanted to see this movie. I was super excited from the minute I heard that it was coming out. Somehow I had heard of this movie, possibly when it was still just kind of a concept before I actually knew who was working on it. And then when I heard who the director and who the actors were, I definitely got even more excited. Maggie Gyllenhaal is the director. She's a super creative person, and I do enjoy some of her other work, like The Lost Daughter, which she, funnily enough, did with the lead actress of this movie, Jessie Buckley. Jessie Buckley is incredible. She's one of my favorite actors right now. She just won her first Oscar, but I do think from The Lost Daughter that Maggie Gyllenhaal and Jessie Buckley definitely work really well together. As you would know from pretty much all of my videos mentioning Frankenstein in some capacity, and my first video being about the new Guillermo del Toro Frankenstein movie, I have very strong feelings about Frankenstein as a story, as a whole franchise. And The Bride in particular is a character I feel very passionate about, so I was super excited to see a director I enjoy who has takes I generally take on a character who I love. I was really excited to see a creative and thoughtful artistic team come together to tell the story of this character and give her autonomy, which she was never really been given in any adaptation, and certainly not in the book itself. Somehow, before a whole lot was coming out about this movie, I had got it in my head that it was going to be a musical. I might be getting it confused with Joker Folie à Deux because I did hear about those movies around the same time. More on that later. But as I was still learning about the movie, I saw a lot of pictures of Jessie as the bride, and I loved the makeup, I loved the costuming. Different pictures of different sets that they had looked amazing, so I was super excited to see it because it definitely looked like it was going to be good. Eventually, I saw that Christian Bale would be portraying Frankenstein's monster. He's obviously an incredible actor, so that was exciting. And the marketing for this movie did get a little into the edgy, I'm so different, I'm 14 and this is deep type things, but I was willing to overlook it because I thought it was just a kind of quirky, fun way to market this movie. Overall, it seemed like it was going to be really fun, and I was excited when it finally came out. Before I get into my thoughts on the movie, I'm going to give a not so quick recap of what happened if you have not seen the movie, and if you have seen the movie and want a little bit of a refresher. We open with a monologue from the ghost of Mary Shelley. She's clearly very sick, both in the head and physically, and she's super erratic and very deranged. She tells us that her life was cut short before she was able to tell her most important story, or her most terrifying story yet. Then we cut to a woman in a bar in Chicago in the 1930s. She's very drunk, doing drunk people things. Mary decides that to tell her story, she's going to possess this woman, and immediately the woman starts acting very erratically. It's like she has a split personality, herself and Mary Shelley. She starts speaking in Mary's voice and just shouting crazy random words, and she's very erratic. Everybody starts looking at her crazy, and she starts spilling all the secrets of the mob boss who runs the bar that they are in. So her guy who she's with is you gotta chill out, you gotta calm down, what are you doing? Eventually, he and one of his friends take her out of the bar, and they're like, dude, knock it off, you're gonna get us in trouble. And they kind of get in a verbal altercation. The woman is still acting crazy, going back and forth between herself and Mary's voice. She's shouting things, she's shouting insults at the guys. They realize she is not just drunk, she is also possessed. So they freak out, and her man accidentally shoves her down the stairs. She hits her head, breaks all her bones, and dies. We cut to a weird looking dude kind of lumbering around the streets of Chicago in the daylight. People are giving him weird looks, and he just kind of pulls his face covering up and keeps walking. He comes into a building in search of a Dr. Euphonious. This doctor is an expert in reanimation, and eventually he does find her. The doctor is curious about him and eventually discovers that he is Frankenstein's monster, who goes by Frank. Frank is seeking out the doctor because he wants to reanimate a woman to make him a mate. The doctor's no, we're not going to dig up a dead body, but no shocker, they do, and it's the woman who died earlier. They get the woman's body, they reanimate her, but Mary Shelley is still in there. So not only has she lost her memory and is she extremely disoriented, she is still possessed by Mary Shelley's ghost. She rejects the doctor, she rejects Frank, but eventually decides that Frank is the lesser of the two evils and runs out of the doctor's lair with him. They go to the club, everybody's fam, until these two guys start harassing the woman, and Frank takes them outside, beats one of their heads against the wall, and curb stomps the other one. So they're kind of on the run now. As Frank and his bride, as the media dubs her, are on the run, we meet the investigators of their crime. One is a crooked cop, but we later reveal that the entire police force is crooked because they're being paid off by the mob. The other is his secretary. Air quotes on secretary, because once we get to know these two, we see that she's really the investigator. He's just kind of there as her cover because she's not allowed to be a investigator as a woman. Almost immediately, Detective Malloy, as she's called, starts tracking down clues of Frank and the bride, and they start following them. Everything gets a little cyclical from here. The duo are on the run. Detective Malloy finds a clue that leads her to their next location. She almost gets them, but then they're thwarted, and the bride and Frank run off again. As all of this is happening, the relationship between Frank and the bride starts to develop. Frank begins to call her Penelope because she's asking, like, oh, do you know anything about my past? What's my name? I can't remember. And he decides to call her Penelope and start telling her that they had been together before her first death, before the accident, as they call it, and that they had always been in love and that they were actually married. Eventually, as the cycle continues, as they're on the run from the cops and the detectives, Penelope finds out that Frank has been lying to her the whole time. She sees the cop who's working with Detective Malloy and actually realizes that they knew each other in the past. This detective, Detective Wiles, is the guy she was with at the bar, so they do know each other, and she starts to realize that she did have a different life before her death. She's not mad at Frank for very long, though, because the cops catch up to them, and Frank gets killed! Oh no! Detective Malloy is also there, and she's going to arrest and stop the bride, but she's starting to feel bad for her because she heard the conversation between Frank and Penelope, or the bride, I should say. As the police are trying to catch the bride, Detective Malloy is trying to stop them, and the bride does escape. She has Frank's body in the back of the car, and she tries to take it to Dr. Euphonius' house because she wants to reanimate Frank's body. Detective Malloy is hot on her trail and follows her to the building. Unfortunately, the cops are right behind, and they follow the bride into the house. They try to stop her. Detective Malloy gets there right before the other police officers and manages to stop them for a little bit so that the bride can try to explain her situation, try to plea for her life, but that does not work, and she dies. Thankfully, though, Detective Malloy has stepped it up. She tells all the cops they need to get out so that Dr. Euphonius and her assistant can have a moment to collect themselves before they come down to the station. And Detective Malloy is like, do what you gotta do. And the doctor reanimates both the bride and Frank, and the end. I don't think I'm going to be very good at reviewing the movie, like, beat by beat as it goes chronologically, so I'm going to try to talk about different individual characters or groups. The first group I'm going to talk about is the mob. The mob serve as the antagonist in this movie, not only in Ida, that's the name of the bride before she died, not only in Ida's life before her death and throughout the movie because of it, but also in the bride and Frank story through the police, because the police are being paid off by the mob. They're also kind of important to this weird side plot that's happening where the bride and her story and all the weird crazy things she's doing while she's on the run with Frank like starts a political movement. I'll kind of get into that later. The mob controls the police, so I think this is supposed to be a representation of the patriarchy. They control every facet of these women's lives and they oppress them. The oppression and control is literally shown in the fact that the mob boss is murdering women and cutting their tongues out. That is how Ida got involved with the police earlier, because she witnessed one of these crimes and was an informant to the detective that she was involved with. Speaking of that detective, Detective Wiles, I honestly did not remember his name until I started looking up like the character list to script this video. He's really important to the story. I just feel like he was one of many characters that were just unnecessary. He was working the mob boss case. I think his name was Lupino. He was working the mob boss's case when he met Ida as a witness, and he fell for her. He knows that this case is important. He knows that the mob boss is murdering these women, and he really cares about Ida, but he was never able to actually finish his investigation because of the hold that the mob has on the police force. An important part of Detective Wiles is his relationship with future Detective Malloy. She is his assistant slash secretary, but she's honestly way better at his job than he is, so they end up working together. I actually find it interesting the way in which he supports her. He's supportive of her as a detective because he knows that she's better than him, but he's not willing to risk his own job at first to support her in becoming a detective. I do really enjoy their dynamic. It's never framed as romantic. They're just friends and co-workers, and as the movie goes on, the relationship gets a lot stronger, and he's willing to do more and put himself more at risk to support her. As the relationship gets stronger, he also grows as a person and becomes a better person, eventually risking his own life to try to save Ida slash Penelope slash the bride. When he tries to save Ida, he does get hurt, and he eventually decides that he does not think he's fit to be a detective. He quits and tells Malloy that he was given the ability to give his badge and gun to anybody he wanted, and he actually gives it to Detective Malloy to allow her to be a detective and continue with the case. Through his relationship with Malloy, he realizes his own faults, and he does make some changes, unlike some characters I'll talk about later. The next person I want to talk about is Detective Malloy herself. She's very strong-willed, and she wants to fight the system that is oppressing her and keeping her from doing her job, but she simply does not have the resources. She's very frustrated by her position, but she doesn't give up or bend to pressure. Instead, she uses those challenges to get to where she needs to be. For example, when she's working with Wiles, the joke is that he's the one who flirts with the cops so she can do the real work. He'll go talk to the cops to get the information that they won't give her, and she'll look for clues and she'll piece everything together once he gives her that information. Throughout the development of her relationship with Detective Wiles, she does urge him to be a better man and a better detective, but she's never put in a position where she needs to fix him or where she's forcing him to do something. He ends up doing that simply because of her strength both as a person and as a detective. The next character I'm going to talk about is Frank. I honestly see Frank's character as more of a device for the bride's growth and character arc than somebody who has a lot of growth in this movie. Seeking out the doctor to create him a bride is a direct parallel to the book, where he seeks out Victor and asks him to create a bride. The character is very lovable and relatable. His love of movies and the actor Ronnie Reed is really important to giving him some more character depth, because the depth of his character in the book is a lot to do with his dynamic with Victor. In the original story, the approval of Victor and desire for purpose are the creature's main motives. Giving Frank the desire to be normal and his obsession with movies and using them as a form of escape gives us a better understanding of his motives in this movie. He wants to be normal by experiencing the romantic and wild lives that Ronnie Reed has in his films. In a way, his kind of idealized view of the world by seeing it through these movies is what leads to his demise. His lack of normality and obsession with movies is causing him to idealize the world in a way that sets unrealistic expectations that ultimately lead to his death and the tension he has with the bride. The biggest part of Frank's character is his relationship with the bride. He is so desperate for love that he doesn't tell her the truth or seek out her actual past. He just tells her that they were lovers before the accident that ended her life and made her lose her memory. This goes back to Frank's habit of idealizing and fantasizing about things and refusing to live in the real world. While it's easy to love Frank and it's easy to feel bad for him because of his situation, he is really the problem in this whole movie. He is failing to give her the autonomy that he lacked in the beginning of his own life. Ultimately, he really doesn't learn a lesson from any of this. There's a big fight between the bride and Frank when she realizes that she is not Penelope and he's been lying to her, but he really doesn't learn anything about it. He dies, and we never see him after he is revived. He dies while they're talking about it, and he has a brief moment of like, oh, I'm so sorry, but we never see him realize that he was in the wrong or change because of the mistakes that he made. The last character I'm going to talk about is Ida slash Penelope slash the bride of Frankenstein slash the bride again. I'm harping on this name thing because it's very important to note that in the beginning of the movie, when Mary Shelley is doing her opening monologue, she says that she's not going to tell us this woman, Ida's name, because she needs to discover it on her own. In the end, she never really does. Her memory loss is supposed to be a reflection of how little she was valued in her own life. Forgetting that her name was Ida is crucial because she needs to discover herself. Ida is a representation of the life that she lived before her death that was not fulfilling, in which she had no value. Next, while she is on the run with Frank, she is dubbed Penelope or Pretty Penny. This is all well and good for a while until she realizes that the freedom she feels with Frank is actually another form of repression. She is being forced to be this idealized version of a woman, this manic pixie dream girl. When the lie that Frank has been telling her is finally revealed, there's this big moment where she chooses her own name. It's supposed to be this big, powerful thing, but the name she chooses is the Bride. We're meant to see this as powerful because she makes it very clear that she is just the bride, not the bride of Frankenstein, just the bride. In the end, that really means nothing for several reasons. For one, the media has dubbed her the Bride of Frankenstein. That's how that name came along. But I'm like 90% sure they literally call her the Bride once. I think there's a headline that just says the Bride. So this is a name that already existed and she didn't come up with. Secondly, the word bride is something that inherently ties you to another person. It is not always a man, which is, I guess, the point, but you're still missing the point of being your own person by choosing a word that ties you to someone. You cannot be a bride without being married to another person. This kind of brings up another problem that I have with her character and with her story. It's that the oppression and repression she's feeling from Frank is never really addressed or looked at as such. It's just what she was feeling in her life prior to her death. She has this big epiphany where she's the bride, just the bride, but then 5 minutes later she decides that she still loves Frank and throws him in her car to reanimate the body. It's explained that she does this because they're simply meant to be and they're just way too in love for her to live a life without him. And sure, perhaps the point was that you can be your own person, you can be free while still being in a loving relationship, but that's never shown. We never see her as her own person. The movie ends before Frank is ever able to see the bride as anything other than this vision he has put upon her. More importantly, she never knows who she is. She still only sees herself through Frank's eyes, or the media's eyes. For a movie that is trying to empower the Bride of Frankenstein and make her the bride, know of Frankenstein, they did a really bad job because we never see her as her own person. Even when she's Ida, we only see her as someone who's with all these other people and she's doing all these things to please her boyfriend and these people she's out at the bar with. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but in a way, the bride is a manic pixie dream girl. She is shown only to the protagonist, in this case being Frank, and we as the audience only see her through his eyes. We and Frank only see her as this idealized version of herself and never as a real person. I may have been able to do Mary Shelley as a character, but I didn't want to get into it because I have way too many thoughts on it and this movie's exhausting as it is. I saw somebody point out in another review that it is a little weird to make Mary Shelley a real person, a character in your movie, especially when they portray her as this like caricature. I do agree. It really wasn't something I thought about at first, but the more I thought about it, like, it is kind of weird to take such big creative liberties when you're talking about a real person. Granted, she's been dead for hundreds of years, but it's still a little odd. I do like the idea of using Mary Shelley's story as like a parallel to the Bride of Frankenstein story or Frankenstein's story, the original one. In the end, though, it doesn't really seem like they actually did that. They kind of set it up because they have Jessie Buckley play both Mary Shelley and Ida / Penelope / the Bride, much like in the 1930s James Whale, The Bride of Frankenstein. But honestly, this movie isn't well enough written or put together to draw more parallels than just that. They really try, but it's such a caricature of the real Mary Shelley that it just doesn't work. Getting into my final thoughts here, I thought it was fine. It was just fine. The only reason I don't say it was just straight up bad is because I did have a really good time. It takes a lot of really big creative swings, which I really appreciate, but unfortunately a lot of them just miss the mark. Many movies and many creators, many writers, directors aren't willing to do that anymore, so I really do have a lot of respect for Maggie Gyllenhaal and this movie because it's willing to take that many risks. For example, there are 2 big dance sequences in this movie, and honestly, I don't really mind them. I found them to be pretty entertaining. The first one is when Frank and the bride go out for the first time and they go to the club. It's a dance sequence in the club, so it fits perfectly. There's really not too much to say on that. It's a bit out there, but it fits and it's really well directed and it looks great, so I enjoy it. The second one is while Frank and the bride are on the run, and this one does cause you to need to like suspend your disbelief for a minute because they crash this big Hollywood party and they're causing a ruckus, but then all of a sudden all these people in the background start joining them in on the dance, and it's like everybody's dancing even though they're disturbing everyone, and they already had a whole fiasco where somebody was like you're weird, go away. Even with that one, I was okay kind of ignoring it because it was fun. It was nice to look at, and I do feel like it fit this kind of quirky, eccentric vibe they were going for. That being said, a lot of the big swings they took were just really predictable. This whole movie was fairly predictable. Even the parts where you're like, oh, I didn't know they were going to do that. You look back and you're like, yeah, I actually kind of did know they were going to do that. If the swings that they took just had a little more oomph, I would have seen this as a lot more entertaining or ballsy. In the end, all the things they try to cram in there, combined with how superficial the bride's story really is, just makes her story fall to the wayside for me. I get that they wanted her story to be a love story, but it doesn't really work. It doesn't work as a love story in the end because she never gets the autonomy that we were promised. She ends up with Frank at the end of the movie, despite the fact that he's lying to her just like everybody else in her life, in Ida's life. Either the entire movie is supposed to be this big satirical comedy, or they just miss the mark on their own story completely. The romance itself is like really cringy. It gets into this like Joker, Harley Quinn, Suicide Squad type thing, kind of like what I was saying with the Joker Folie à Deux thing. I completely must have gotten those movies confused because it's just so derivative of that story. I kind of talked about this earlier, but I genuinely don't know how to bring this into a review because it's so disconnected from the rest of the movie. But they try to do this like empowering girl boss, yes, movement thing where the bride has an outburst and she kind of calls out all these corrupt men, and somehow that gets in the news, and then like around the whole country, a bunch of women start also starting a revolution and whatever. It's so disconnected from the main plot of the movie that I don't know what they were going for. It's also super unrealistic because how does like some crazy things happening in New York or whatever end up causing random revolutions about the exact same thing across the entire country? It makes no sense, and it just doesn't fit with the rest of the movie. It tries to broaden the whole story, and in a way that makes the bride story even less powerful because it's taking it away from her and making it this national sensation. It's really sensationalized. The whole movie is very much like, ooh, look at this crazy thing we did. We're so weird and quirky. And there's no real substance to it. Hi, I thought of a couple things I wanted to add in while I was editing. First off, when I said that it was super unrealistic for the bride's story to get spread around and cause a revolution, I meant specifically for the time period, because if this happened in the 21st century, you know, after the advent of social media, that would make a lot more sense. You know, like this gets posted online, a bunch of people are thinking it's super cool, and it spreads like wildfire. That would make sense. But mind you, this is set in the 1940s. The media was not what it is today. This story would not have spread as quickly as it does in the movie. It probably wouldn't even have spread across the entire country. So it is really unrealistic that as many people heard about it and were inspired by it as they were in the movie. I also say a couple times throughout the video that what they're calling out are these corrupt men or like corrupt individuals, specifically men in every single case. That is not because I think that those are the only things that can be corrupted in the world. That is because that is what is addressed in the movie. There are corrupt cops in the movie. That is like the main point, that they're working with the mob, but it definitely focuses on the individuals who are doing wrong and not the systems that are corrupt, the systems that need to be changed. As I'll talk about in a second with Detective Malloy's story, this movie is just straight up propaganda. I do think Detective Malloy's story is powerful on its own, but the fact that they decided to make her a detective or a cop or whatever really shows that they have no desire to address issues outside of blatant man oppressed woman. There are way more factors to take into account here. Now, I am not at all saying that every single movie that wants to address a social issue needs to talk about every factor that goes into it, but it is important to bring those things up because this is such a nuanced problem and this movie has such a superficial take on it. There is absolutely no intersectionality and it makes everything seem very surface level. So I do think that goes to my point of the movie having no substance. They don't really have anything to say about the problem other than this is bad and I don't like it. They do actually manage to have one really powerful story that has like feminist empowering messaging, but it's not the main character. It's Detective Malloy. I really love this one scene of hers. It's right after Detective Wiles quits and gives her the badge and gun. She is going to try to get information on the bride and on Frank from this man, but all the other cops are there. They're pushing her aside. The man she's trying to question is ignoring her because he doesn't think she's a real cop. So what she does is she goes to the man's assistant and is like, hey, can you help me out? It really shows how resourceful and smart she is, and also subtly gives her an opportunity to uplift other women who are being pushed to the wayside. It gives a pretty good commentary on the way that women are treated in this society. Even though Detective Malloy is probably the best detective there is, and even though that man's assistant probably knows just as much, if not more, about what happened than he did, everybody's ignoring the two women in the room. As I said earlier, my experience watching the movie definitely improved my overall rating. I saw it with a good friend who's also able to appreciate campiness and cringy things, shout out Grace, so we were able to kind of laugh off some of the weirder parts of this movie. I do, however, think that Grace had a significantly different experience than me because there were times when she got to have surround sound. The couple sitting next to her was making out the entire time, and mind you, there's a scene in the movie where Frank and Penelope are in a movie theater and the couple in front of them is making out and everybody starts yelling at them. These two kept making out. It's crazy. Life really does imitate art. It's like we had our own little Frank and Penny. It was so sweet. At the end of the day, The Bride is an empowering story about a woman who overcomes the challenges and oppression she faces in society. She uses her charm and wit to push through, blazing her own trail and, albeit subtly, uplifting other women in the process. She fights for justice in her own way, making sure she is never corrupted by the evil that surrounds her. She is truly herself in a world that wishes that she wasn't. Unfortunately, though, this story is pushed aside for a bland and superficial story that loses its own message. It's called The Bride with an exclamation point, but as my signboard would indicate, I really think it should be called The Bride because it doesn't know what it's doing. Thank you for watching. Sorry this was another bad movie review I had to write. It just wasn't that good. But I had a good time watching it. It's something you could have on in the background. It looks really nice, but it really doesn't make any impact. In case any of you were wondering from my earlier comment about wishing I could get into NC State because that was the day I got my acceptance, I did, but if you couldn't tell by the shirt, I did not accept that acceptance and I'm going to UNC Asheville. I really hope you guys know how much this YouTube channel means to me and how much making content for you guys means, because I am missing the opportunity to watch a Montreal hockey game live right now. If the Victoire lose, it's your fault. I'm half joking, but thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Editing Priya again. I say next month and I'll see you next month. I'll talk about the Oscars, blah, blah, blah. I recorded this in March when The Bride actually came out, and it's definitely not March anymore. So heads up that this is a little bit outdated. Sorry about that. Let me know if there's anything you want to see next month. If you want to see me talk about the Oscars, I will, but I'll be a month late and that'll be another video where I'm just yapping because I don't know what to talk about. I think this is the third time I've said it, but thank you for watching and I'll see you next month.